Yesterday, I asked about supports for families impacted by the accelerated coal phase-out. Clearly, this government completely missed the mark in providing any information to rural families or municipal leaders on how their communities will change. And with all due respect to the Economic Development Minister, I'm surprised you didn't reach out personally to these communities on such an important matter. Minister, I've spoken to a few more mayors since yesterday, and still your office hasn't returned their calls. Why are you afraid to properly engage with these communities?
Minister of Economic Development and Trade.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and most of that premise is actually factually incorrect. First of all, I have sat down with many mayors and councillors from affected communities. That was several months ago. Since then, one of my ADMs has been reaching out to each of the mayors individually. We stood up a coal panel, which in the new year will be going into these communities, and we are engaging with the local municipalities because we value their input.
That's interesting, Minister, because you sat down with them in June, you released the report last week, and they didn't even get a copy of the report. Given that the NDP has shirked their responsibility on this issue and are hiding behind the very businesses you shut down and now asking them to help families and communities in transition, and given that families brace for the worst, this government is only planning on speaking with these communities months down the road. Premier, you haven't clearly outlined how businesses are supposed to adequately support these families to make this transition. Will you instruct your economic minister to do his job properly, outline transition and support for these families?
Honourable Minister. Minister of the Environment.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And in fact, the transition plan for workers and for communities has been at the forefront of our minds, Mr. Speaker. And that is why, Mr. Speaker, we have, first of all, engaged with the companies in an appropriate negotiation to provide certainty. And part of that certainty, Mr. Speaker, has been the capacity market and has been the negotiation of the transition payments over time. And that is why TransAlta, Mr. Speaker, which is one of the very important embedded companies in this province, has said this allows us to convert some of our coal plants to gas, keep our workers working, keep those communities strong, and be able to provide...
Thank you, Honourable Minister. Second supplemental.
Given that the truth is that the NDP government doesn't seem to have the back of Albertans, and given that the truth is that the NDP seems to have no interest in collaborating with these investors, to the Premier, you've told Albertans that these investments are here to replace the coal phase-out, but we know that these projects aren't even being planned. Where do you expect the investment in renewables to come from if struggling design companies in Alberta aren't even designing the projects?
Minister of the Environment.
Well, Mr. Speaker, what we have done is put forward a careful, thoughtful plan in negotiation and in consultation with the affected companies and ensuring that we are keeping that capital here in Alberta as we transition our electricity system, Mr. Speaker. Now, when we took over, Mr. Speaker, there were already 12 of the 18 plants that were scheduled for decommissioning, and we discovered to our horror that there was no plan for any of those communities, Mr. Speaker, and so that is why we have dedicated funds within the budget. We are looking at our apprenticeship and training investments, Mr. Speaker, and we are moving this province forward.